Cruz, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen who have endured. My name is Bonnie Fisher, and I'd like to begin with a few words about myself so that you will know that I speak with the authority of an entire professional career spent in public education. I taught English and Latin in the public schools of New Jersey and Indiana for 22 years, retiring from Broad Ripple High School here in Indianapolis 4 years ago. I taught grades 7 through 12. I've been both the university supervisor for student teachers as well as the classroom supervisor, and I've taught undergraduates and graduates and teachers in graduate courses. I've presented professional development seminars for university faculty and worked in executive education department of a university school of business. I earned an MAT in classical studies and a PhD in secondary education. As a corporate employee, I provided federally sponsored education services to teachers in the lower Midwest states, including Indiana. As a board member and officer of Global Education Reforms Watch Incorporated, I now am engaged in collecting, annotating, and analyzing school books from the early 1800s to the present. And I have read the standards. Opposition to the standards, both the Common Core state standards and Indiana's, has been steadily growing this past year. You are already familiar with many of the arguments against the standards, that they effect an end to local control, that they will lead to a national curriculum, that the state legislature and the public were deliberately circumvented until the deal was done, that the standards make the public schools a corporate-designed worker training program. All these statements of opposition are true, and they come from a wide swath of energized citizens. I hope you've been paying close attention to your constituents and their views. This committee is playing now catch-up and trying to regain some governance over Indiana's education. Make no mistake, approve and agree to implement the Common Core state standards, and you will have surrendered that power that is legitimately yours as legislators and the people's spokesmen to the corporations that control the state and national chambers of commerce, corporate foundations such as Gates, Eli Broad, and Achieve that have driven the push to adopt the standards, and the testing and the publishing companies that will profit so handsomely from the standards. It is not likely you will ever get that power back. Your power will be limited to minor matters like setting the dates for the assessments and voting on the minimum number of minutes per week of mandatory physical education. In your self-interest as a governing body to reject the standards. More importantly, it is your obligation and responsibility to care for Indiana's children who will suffer under the standards. Indeed, Achieve, the above-mentioned foundations, the chambers of commerce, etc., have only touted benefits to the economy of treating children as human resources. You, however, must consider the present and future welfare of these young and vulnerable human beings who are far more than just economic entities. I read the standards printed in contemporary textbooks and cringe when I put them alongside of the aims in the vintage textbooks of the Global Education Reforms Watch collection. I cringe because the pupils of decades past were better and more thoroughly schooled in the several subjects than today's young people. The standards, whether the Common Core or Indiana's, only require that children do. They do not have to know. Indeed, any subject matter they may need in order to do is treated as just so much just-in-time or nice-to-know information. And since that information has no organic structure, it contributes little or nothing to a child's intellect and has no staying power. The standards will ensure an ignorant adult population who have internalized and acceded to the authorities' prerogative to tell them that they don't measure up and that they themselves are to blame. Such people are not likely to challenge that authority, nor involve themselves in public affairs, nor run for public office, nor even join a union. Their lives will be circumscribed by the workplace and the shopping mall. The evidence for this, and what deeply angers me, is the purpose of these standards. And both the Common Core and Indiana's have the same purpose, that children K through 12 be college and career ready. That's it. Nothing more. How shallow. How dehumanizing to our children. How pernicious to our republic. If the standards will not provide a true education for our young people, what will? A thorough grounding in the liberal arts, a return to the traditional academic subjects which embody real standards of worth and taste, character and action, logic and thought, speaking and writing, knowledge and skill. Superintendent Ritz, after all, was elected by 1.3 million people who objected to Dr. Bennett's proposals and reforms, including the Common Core state standards. That citizen outcry caused the legislature to pause and take stock of the standard situation, which you are now doing. In your deliberations, don't forget those 1.3 million voters. Reconsider the objections they have put before you and think about what I have just said. Then, dump the standards and restore teaching the traditional academic subjects.
Thank you very much. Could you submit your testimony to the committee?
Happy to.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Lucas?
Thank you, Senator. Ma'am, that's probably the best testimony I've heard.
8 hours.
50 hours, 8 hours.
Thank you very much.
You collect curriculum from years past?
Most of my collection, or not my collection, GERW's collection, is that of textbooks. In that collection, there are some...
Pull that microphone down a little bit.
There are some curricular materials. I collect what I can find. Textbooks are more commonly found than curricular materials. I will take whatever I can locate.
Maybe you can answer this for me. In the quest to learn about this, the last meeting, I did some research on literacy rates of colonial America. And I found consistently, they say it was between 70 and 100% in most of the approximately 2.5 million people back then. But it wasn't the percentage of literacy, it was the level that they read. The Federalist Papers, those were, not telling you, but my astonishment, essays written to newspapers to get people to buy into the Constitution. Well, to think that is what that was the level that the general population read at that time, without having a Department of Education or a federal, involvement in the education. And then you fast forward a century. I've seen this a lot, and maybe you can verify exit exams of 8th graders during the turn of the century. I don't know that many high schoolers today could pass those.
I think you're probably correct. What I have seen, I have collected a great many textbooks. I don't have them all annotated, to be sure. I've annotated, I would estimate, upward of close to 200, shall we say. Right now I'm working on the arithmetic and math books, and in that collection there's approximately 80 books that I'm really familiar with. What I have noticed in those books is that topics that were treated as ordinary, say, shall we say, arithmetic for, say, 6th, 7th, maybe 6th and 7th grades in particular, what we would think of, would include certainly decimals and fractions, but then they go on to other subjects such as insurance, ratio, proportion, discount, business commerce, business arithmetic, that one. That's certainly not in a comparable textbook today at all. The level of literacy, the level of reading level that you are speaking of, has dropped steadily since the 1920s. I am certainly not an expert at all on reading. I'm seated with a colleague, Dr. June Gilstad, who is, and perhaps could address that question better than I. But what I find in the English textbooks, or even in the math, the arithmetic textbooks, in the prefaces, the authors will state such things as, I've made attempt to keep the sentences short. Vocabulary has been restricted to a certain list. And so you see that. Compare that with a textbook, say, from an arithmetic book, say, from the 1880s, or even the opening years of the 1900s. And they don't do that. They don't have to do that. The reading level is much more advanced, I guess you might say.
That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. Is here we are in 2013, after billions spent reinventing the wheel, and we find ourselves further away from a better education from 100 years ago. And it seems like we're getting farther away from what was a better education for a lot less money. And I hate to equate this with financial, because obviously a good education is worth the money, but when you look at what we've spent to what we're getting out of it, and now here we are discussing this at 9 o'clock at night in this year, and it's like another great fix. I'm missing something here.
Well, I think we have to face up to the fact that the textbooks have been steadily dumbed down. There is less information. There's less subject matter in the textbooks. The irony, of course, is that the textbooks have increased humongously in size and in weight. A standard math text from 2007-2010 is going to be in size larger than 8.5 by 11 document. It's going to be more like a 9 by 12. It's going to be about 2 inches thick. It's going to weigh at least 5 pounds and have less in it. And it's terribly expensive. So yeah, we're putting a lot of money into ignorance. There's something that I would suggest to you all to ask yourselves. It's that standard legal question, and I'll give it to you in Latin since it's legal. Cui bono? Who benefits? Who benefits from having students, from having children who spend a number of years and don't do well in school? That is, they don't learn to read, or they don't learn to read fluently, who become frustrated, who benefits from ignorance? Well, people who can take advantage, corporations who can take advantage of ignorance, and from ignorance, of course, comes gullibility. So this has been going on for since the early decades, certainly of the last century. And that's in a particular organization. It started there, it was, so to speak, encapsulated there. The organization no longer exists. It was called the National Civic Federation. It was an organization of leaders in all fields: politics, corporations, labor unions. Samuel Gompers was a member. And that group, very powerful, very wealthy, decided that it was in their interest to maintain their position and their control immediately over unions at that time, and over politics. And part of what they did then is effect certain changes, and very influential ones, so that they would maintain their power. The way to do that is to have people not know as much, to become ignorant. And increasingly, that is what we have. That is why I said that I think the Common Core state standards and Indiana standards per se are pernicious to our republic, because we cannot continue to have a viable democracy with an ignorant population, or a population that is gullible, or a population that is mentally shackled, and have somebody else, some other group, whether it's the 1% or wherever they are, be in charge of affairs. Somebody is in charge of affairs. It is not to a great deal ordinary people such as myself. I see encroachments upon the power which is vested in state legislatures, in yourselves as representatives of the populace. Yes, you have a certain amount of authority. I'm glad that you do, but I see it being encroached upon, and certainly in some of the testimony that you've had today, you have been pressured into accepting the state standards, as in Indiana shouldn't go it alone because there are these 45 other states who have the standards, and you shouldn't buck them, and et cetera, et cetera. So I understand that you folks are under a lot of pressure, and you have a lot to consider. You have that 1.3 million voters to start with. They are, in turn, you have them as your source of authority. And of course, there's the Constitution, which is your source of power.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Representative Rhodes?
Before you sit down, Bonnie, I really appreciate that you sat for so many hours to give us your opinions. And what I wanted to ask is, could you tell me under what standards your educational background came from? I mean, what standards were in place when you came through the educational system?
Oh, there wasn't none.
That's right, there wasn't
There
any.
were none, yeah.
And you were very fluent. You were able to think. You were able to analyze. You were able to state your thoughts and what your feelings are very fluently. And I'm very impressed that you've been able to do that without a set of standards to guide you through your educational career. And I really applaud you for that. And I appreciate that you've come here to share with us. You're a breath of fresh air to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, whatever, whatever skills I seem to possess or education I hope I do indeed display, I give thanks to two persons. One thing, and that is I was educated in the traditional academic subjects. Two, I was educated by some very fine teachers whom I still revere, though they probably are no longer on this earth. And the third person has been dead for 2,000 years, and that's Marcus Tullius Cicero, who I studied in high school and found him awfully difficult, and he was so pompous and so conceited I couldn't stand him. Until the very end of that third year, when I realized he was also an extremely skilled speaker. And when the crisis came for him, as it did, he was also a man of courage. And I value that a great deal. Thank you.
So if you were to give us advice here as we study standards, etc., and if we're discussing Common Core, we're discussing doing our own standards, would you suggest, and what I get from what you've said today, that your suggestion might be to us, and I don't want to put words in your mouth and you can tell me, that we go back to the classical liberal arts way of teaching and those kind of
Certainly those disciplines. Yes.
disciplines?
Yes.
Should be.
There are certain methods which are appropriate to those disciplines. Some other methods are perhaps not a good fit with modern times. So the methods are something for teachers to choose and to decide upon. But the content of those subjects, yes, we need to go back to that.
Thank you very much for testimony.
Thank you. Our last person to testify today, who has been here all day as well.